Hi, everybody. Welcome back to a new episode of the Biotech Project. I promise you we have a really exciting and very interesting episode ahead of us today. I'm going to save that for John to give you some info on who our guest is and introduce him. But I want to remind everybody that it is really important for us that you listen to us on whatever platform it is that you like to listen to. We're on all of them, whether it's Spotify, Google, Apple, or any of the other ones. You can listen to us on any of them. And of course, if you'd like to watch the video, we're available where videos are available, including YouTube and Spotify and Apple. So make sure you give it a listen, like, subscribe. Also, you can go to thebiotechproject.com where you'll be able to read about today's guest and follow him on LinkedIn and wherever else you can follow our guest today. And not to be elusive, but I really want John to do the introduction of our guest today. So, John, why don't you give us a quick rundown on who's joining us, and then we'll play the intro.
Sounds good. Thanks, Scott. Everybody, welcome back to Season 2 of the Biotech Project. We're super excited today to be with Jeff Galvin. Jeff is the founder and CEO of American Gene Technologies, and we're really pumped to be with him today because he's going to talk to us a lot about not just his career and his background and how he's gotten to where he is today, but a bit about what they're doing at AGT and the proprietary gene delivery platforms that they're working with. And Jeff brings a whole lot of great experience. He's been a serial entrepreneur for about 30 years and really prides himself on the Silicon Valley startup background to really be the backbone of what they do at AGT. So as I mentioned, as part of gene therapy, they're really working with viral vector technology. And my understanding, Jeff, and I'll let you get into this a bit more later, is he had the great fortune of meeting with Dr. Roscoe Brady from the NIH many years ago, which kind of gave birth to some of the background of what Jeff's put together in American Gene Technologies today. So maybe without further ado, Scott, why don't you play us some starter music and we'll get right into it. Thanks.
You want to break into and navigate your career in the pharma and biotech industry. We know how to teach you. This is the Biotech Project. From sales to medical affairs and everything in between, we're talking about it. No matter how you got here, from here to your next role is up to you, and we're here to help. You'll hear from guests in every role, from CEO to sales, recruiters to hiring managers. The Biotech Project. Here are your hosts, Scott Resnick and Dr. John Walsh.
All right. Welcome back, Jeff. Let's take it away. We'd love to hear a little bit about you, where you're at right now, and importantly, what's going on at American Gene Technologies.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate it. As you mentioned earlier, I'm the CEO of American Gene Technologies, and we are a gene and cell therapy company that is developing solutions for serious human diseases. Our mission is to reduce suffering and reduce death from these serious human diseases. And we think that gene and cell therapy is a new, powerful technology which is going to open up solutions to things that were completely untreatable in the past, completely unaddressable. I think that ultimately gene and cell therapy is going to send radiation and chemotherapy the way of bloodletting and leeches. In the meantime, there's 7,000 monogenic diseases that are right in the wheelhouse of just basic viral vectors. And, you know, the secret sauce around AGT is that we believe in the platform because of my background in Silicon Valley, because of my background in other types of high-tech industries, especially software. One of the things that I recognized about gene and cell therapy is we're modifying DNA, which could be looked at as the operating system of the human cell. And now that we can correct errors in that operating system, or we can improve that operating system, the question is, what can't we do? That was the epiphany I had when I met Roscoe Brady and he explained viral vectors to me, which are really simple. The idea is that viruses have been getting into your body and making you sick by reprogramming your DNA for 1.5 billion years. And recently we figured out how to break open viruses and take out the deadly DNA, the disease DNA, and throw it away. We can use what's left of the virus as like an empty stealth bomber. We can go ahead and put something in there, some DNA, that when it gets installed in your DNA, when it gets added to your cell, it improves the operation of that cell or corrects a problem in that cell. Most of the companies that you see out there are doing just that. There are 7,000 monogenic loss of function disorders. In other words, you're born with one gene defect where you're missing something that you need. Could be anywhere from irritating lactose intolerance to deadly spinal muscular atrophy. And but it all boils down to, if we could just get that gene back in the cells that need it, you wouldn't have a disease. You'd be making that enzyme or protein that you've been missing. And, that the simplest thing to do is to go ahead and crack open, something like HIV. So pretty deadly, right? Crack open HIV, you scoop out the AIDS virus, the thing that's actually causing the disease. Now you have something that can install any gene in any cell. And so we figure out, okay, where do you need the gene that you're missing? This industry's come so far at this point that you can order any gene over the internet. It'll come the next day by FedEx in a plasmid. You can slice it up and start putting it in these viral shells and testing it in your lab. And that's the nature of what we do. And the big thing for us is the platform. So coming from the software industry, I recognize that what we learned in the software revolution of the last 80 years applies to this new software revolution for your body for the next 200 years. And that is that the platform is the thing. The reason that Microsoft has been so dominant in software is because they had MS-DOS and then Windows. They have a platform that contains all the basic elements that you need to create an application on top of that, and that's useful to everybody. And that's exactly what we've created here. The MS-DOS for your body, eventually it'll be the Windows for your body. One day it'll be an iPhone, where curing a disease is like writing an app, because the iPhone of this disease technology, this drug development technology, will do all the heavy lifting. And you just need to understand how to create value. You'll get this right away, John, as a doctor, right? You can figure out, what are the drivers of a disease? And if the platform can go ahead and, once you specify those drivers, it can sever those drivers or fix those drivers or whatever. Okay, now the important thing is knowledge of the disease instead of the knowledge of gene and cell therapy. Just like on an iPhone, it's knowledge of the value you want to create on the iPhone, not of GPS and cellular technologies and all that stuff that you can take for granted once that platform is there. So this, I think, is the big idea behind AGT. It's what makes us a little different than other gene and cell therapy companies. And what we hope to do is just share that with the world and let everybody develop whatever it is that they're passionate about on our platform, while saving 90% of the cost, 90% of the time, and 99% of the risk of developing a drug.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And I mean, you hit one of the things right on the head right up front. This technology has so much potential in so many different diseases. So I know that you mentioned you're all working on HIV. You're also, I saw when I looked at the website, working on PKU and immuno-oncology as well. So the question is, how do you pick, right? Where do you go, and what drives you to do the diseases that you're looking at first?
It's all opportunistic, right? So if you have a basic technology and you want to create value on that, and you also want to prove the basic platform idea, what you want to do is you want to go for the low-hanging fruit. And so what we did actually is, in the early days, I thought it was too early to progress into the clinic, because that's a very expensive place to develop drugs. Human trials are really the bane of drug development. Now, in gene and cell therapy, it's much more predictable. And I think we're going to find that barrier to entry is substantially reduced every year by the fact that, these viral vectors become completely predictable. The genes that we're putting in there are very, very specific. The viruses can be targeted to certain cells, so you can isolate the disease cells from the healthy cells, and you can prevent a lot of side effects that way. These are all the things that knock things out of the clinical development. So it wasn't really until 2015 that I thought the FDA was kind of ready to do this in an efficient manner. They had learned enough from previous experiments that we weren't going in somewhere where they were completely naive and maybe hamstrung with safety concerns over the unknown. Enough of the veil had been lifted on gene and cell therapy, and there had been some successes. But by then, we had done 20 proofs of principle by getting grants from NIH to try out our gene and cell therapy platform on a variety of different diseases. So we had been through hepatitis C, liver cancer, prostate cancer, familial dysautonomia, phenylketonuria. I mean, we did about 20 of these things. And what we got from that was we learned common pieces that went into all of them. Then 2015 rolls around. One of the things we'd been working on is HIV. And when we looked at the clinical path, we decided actually HIV had probably the easiest path through the FDA because it was so similar. Our approach to curing HIV was so similar to CAR T that they'd seen it all before. The only difference was we were going to use a different genetic construct. It's a less toxic construct on less cells. But other than that, it was the same thing. We're pulling out T cells, modifying them, putting them back in, and they fight the disease. And sure enough, the FDA was amenable to the idea, and we submitted an IND in 2019. But to go back to your original question, so how did we pick it? Opportunistically. It was just a Pareto analysis, right? You just go, what's the impact of the disease that you can do? What's the risk? That gives you sort of like, this is the total value. You line them all up from biggest to smallest, and you go, how much money do we have? We can afford 3. And we ended up doing HIV, phenylketonuria, and immuno-oncology. So those are the main sort of lead programs in our platform. But our platform itself has common elements that might underpin thousands of diseases eventually, but certainly hundreds today.
That's
so
awesome.
My head's going kind of crazy. I've got a million things that I would love to know. But before we do that, can I peel back the onion a little bit? Because I think one of the really interesting things when I've read about you and watched a few other opportunities to hear you speak online, I was really taken back by how you got to where you are today. So we like to call it everybody's biotech project, right? It's how you got from where you started to today.
Yeah.
Could you share just a little bit of that? Because I think when a lot of our audience is saying, well, here I am today, this is where I want to be tomorrow, how do I get there? And you've got a really interesting here I was and here I am story. So would you mind just a few minutes? I don't want to take
Yeah, I'll try to do this quickly. And I think it is kind of interesting because I always tell people if you want to be successful in gene and cell therapy, first thing you need to do is forget everything you know about biotech or pharmaceuticals because it'll only hold you back. It's that different. It sort of reminds me of the difference between the PC and the mainframe back when I was at Apple. That it is very hard when you're a mainframe thinker to get your head around a PC, why it would ever be valuable. You have to have a vision to join with the current technology to understand where it's going and why it actually can have impact in the industry in general. So, and that's fortunately, I was the perfect, gene and cell therapy CEO when I started because I knew nothing about biotech or pharmaceuticals. Which is why nobody took me seriously, and which is lucky that I had some of my own money to invest. But I had a vision that was really unique in the industry about that platform because everywhere I went and I, talked to pharma companies about the platform idea, they just told me, look, people don't buy platforms, they buy drugs. Come back to me when you have a drug. Right. And I'm like, well, that's like telling Microsoft, come back to me once you write an application. Like, the Windows just has no value. Right. MS-DOS has no value. The iPhone has no value. Right. Okay. So I was like, no, this is the way we're going to accelerate this whole industry. And that really comes from my old industry. Right. That comes from software and computers in Silicon Valley. What happened was, I was kind of a computer whiz as a kid in the 7th grade. And, this is in early 1970s for me. I discovered a teletype in the basement of my junior high school, now called middle schools, I guess. And I learned how to program in a language called Logo that, was on this teletype where we're using paper tape to store our programs or my program because nobody else was using this thing. And it was attached over a phone line to a mini computer, which was, sort of the closest that you could come to computing if you weren't a Fortune 500 company was mini computers sort of brought it down a little bit to that scale. So when I saw that, my head just exploded. I was like, here you've got this tireless machine that can work with numbers and letters, never make a mistake. You describe the recipe once and it bakes the cake right every single time. Right. And I was like, that's what programs are. They're just recipes. Then, I lived near MIT. So I was wandering around on weekends there and I was trying to find free computer resources, but I saw robotics and sensor technology. And then boom, okay, well, computers will reach outside of numbers and letters and they will control things and they will sense things. And so I saw that this is, this unlimited future for computers, and it just became a passion of mine. I ended up teaching computer science in high school on weekends at MIT. And then I got into Harvard and I was teaching there. One of my favorite things there was I was head teaching fellow for computer science for non-computer, non-science people, right? So the idea being that I was actually, a lot of the teaching was about conveying my passion for something that I thought would impact everybody's lives, which is great practice for, gene and cell therapy. I think it's really the same way. What I see in this is that this is going to touch every single person's life on Earth. And there's no question about this because it follows the standard tech curves. And, we saw it in computers where the first ones were expensive. And now Africans are carrying around, smartphones, right? Because it just gets better and better and better while getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. This is the kind of revolution we're at the beginning of. Well, in Silicon Valley, I made a lot of money on that revolution. And at about age 41, I looked at my bank account. I had a lot of luck investing because I knew the industries and I'd been through computers, internet, apps, software, of course. And I realized I don't need to work anymore. So I thought that was always my dream, retire young. 41 seemed pretty young to retire. And I did, and I bought a house in Hawaii, and I had a house in Hawaii and a house in Silicon Valley and an unlimited airplane ticket between them. And that was retirement for me. As soon as I had time, I started dating heavily. I met my wife, and then we got married. We traveled around the world for a while. And after about 5 years of that, I just wanted some more intellectual stimulation. I got tired of following my wife around the world, carrying her bags, only seeing her from behind. And I thought I'll just dabble in something, maybe mentor somebody in Silicon Valley or invest a small amount of money in a company or sit on a board or whatever. Then I met Roscoe Brady. He showed me viral vectors, and my head just exploded. I was like, okay, this is the beginning of an opportunity to cure pretty much everything. I mean, I said that right to him in the first meeting. I said, now that we can change your DNA, what can't we fix in the human body? Because I can't think of a thing, and he couldn't think of anything either. And this is the early days of it, obviously. But yes, if you understand this technology, that's kind of the excitement level. That's the possibilities. It was just too exciting not to get involved in. And that's how I landed in this job. And ever since then, it's been a learning experience, which is really fun for me. I'm getting my street PhD, sort of. And, the results have been great.
When people ask me, what's the biggest change I've seen? I've been in the industry since 98. So I worked for a big pharma company, carried a bag out in the field, primary care, and then eventually in some specialty stuff. And, it was the era of, and you made mention to this, kind of forget everything you know about biotech and pharma if you want to look at where it's going. It was the era of the blockbuster mentality. So if it wasn't going to be a Lipitor or a Vioxx or a Celebrex where it was going to make billions of dollars, these companies didn't want to touch it, let alone ultra rare disease and gene therapies and, these.
Yeah.
And then now just this weekend, I was talking to my wife about how, somebody who has some type of unknown disorder, like a severe autism or something like that. Today, you can probably figure out what gene caused that, and there may actually be a treatment and a fix, even if it's, only 1,000 people across the world that have that, because technologies like you're describing have come around. I was lucky enough to be in the ultra rare oncology, hematology space for a period of time. And the drug was discovered using AI. They figured out where there was an issue and they created AI to map out how to fix it and put together the protein to create this drug. And
Yeah.
it's amazing what we're doing now. And part of what I was so excited to speak to you about today is I happen to be a cancer survivor, and I have a type of cancer that can come back at any time. I had renal cell cancer, and it's solid tumor, and the CAR Ts and all these other things, they've always been on the hematologic side of things. But reading and hearing about what you're developing and knowing that solid tumor treatments are on the horizon, I mean, this is kind of what we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
I spent and have been in immuno-oncology for a very long time, and I remember when we first started talking about it, and this is kind of my question. I had doctors and physicians shooing me away saying, stop with this fantasy stuff with immuno-oncology. It's like Star Trek, don't talk to me about dendritic cells because, it's far-fetched and, we don't believe it. And now
now it's mainstream.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. Hey, remember when you used to throw me out and tell me there was no room for Star Trek medicine in here?
People forget that science fiction yesterday becomes science fact today. I mean, think about how much stuff was predicted by Isaac Asimov and even Star Trek, right? Yeah. The Star Trek communicator actually existed for a short period of time until a better cell phone came along.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And it's amazing. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Your whole backstory. So yeah, I guess there was a question in there.
Yeah. So my question is, what has been the response to the medical community and then your other biotech companies that are out there that you're trying to network with? Has it been because you mentioned waiting for the right time to kind of move forward? Do you feel like you're there? Are you getting the responses and the partnerships and the desire to work with you that you're hoping for? Are you still hitting some of those walls that existed just a few years ago?
It gets better every year. People are catching up to the vision. We've been always skating to where the puck's going, which seems crazy at first. And I always joke about the fact that back in 2008, when I was first trying to raise money, if I had a nickel for every person who just called me crazy, I could have funded the company on those nickels. Right. And, I was having all these meetings and everybody had the same response, which is like, yeah, like what you're saying. That's science fiction, and come back after you prove it. Right. And they didn't even want, this idea of a proof that gene and cell therapy technology was valid, sort of like if I showed them the transistor and I said, we can make all these things out of this, they just go like, yeah, come back when you make something out of it. Right. They wouldn't see the value in that. No, they didn't want proof that the transistor was valuable. They actually wanted a transistor radio before they would actually get involved. And around 2015, 16, maybe institutional investors started to come back in. But then they were looking for things that were early stage that they could control. And, you got to remember that the model of a VC involves, looking at a company as somewhat of a financial product that needs to develop over a fixed period of time. And for that, to be executed on, they need to have a certain level of control of it, and then they need to force it to that conclusion. And so, not all agendas overlap at that point. And our valuation was way too high at that point for somebody to buy a third of the company in the first round and get to 51% in the second round, right? So by the time, they were interested in us, we were way past them, and so ever since then, it's a matter of how do you get on the carousel once it's moving? And I think that, what gets you there is data. So right now, for instance, we have a clinical trial. We just had a successful phase 1 in, listen to this, drum roll, please, HIV cure, right? Okay, so we are a clinical stage biopharma company with a successful phase 1 in HIV cure. Now, people go, well, phase 1, that's just safety. No, not in gene and cell therapy, because gene and cell therapy is so powerful, the FDA doesn't let you test it until you've already theoretically proven its safety, and then you have a very small phase 1 on people that have the disease. So we're actually getting efficacy data in the phase 1, and we're still recording the results of an analytic treatment interruption to see how effective this was in 7 people that had HIV. The goal is to make a functional cure where a one and done treatment, and they never have to worry about HIV for the rest of their lives. They don't take any pills, any special medication. They're not contagious. They can't get AIDS, and they can't be reinfected. The dream come true for 38 million people. In this phase 1, every single one of the patients has shown therapeutic effect. Okay. Just not over the functional cure line yet, but not all the data's in. We could still get some functional cures in the phase 1, and we got a lot of data that tells us exactly what we need to change. So in the next time we run, a 10-patient study, we'll see some of those functional cures. Nothing's absolutely certain in biotech, but what I would say is that it's much more predictable because now what you're talking about are things that make sense. These aren't molecules that go all over your body and treat every cell the same. These are targeted viruses that will tend to be tropic and infect the target cells. And then they carry little software components that act like if-then switches. They're called specific promoters, and they decide whether to turn the drug on based on an enzyme or a protein that's inside the cell that can indicate the type of the cell if you're looking for a particular tissue to treat, or whether the cell has a particular disease because it's expressing something characteristic of the disease. Like, in prostate cancer, that might be human prostate-specific antigen. We could use that to turn on the drug and know that we could avoid off-target effect in cells that weren't expressing high levels of prostate-specific antigen, right? So this is obviously a whole different ball game in the drug development world in general. And, that's the stuff that we're working with here. And so the progress is much more predictable. I think what we're going to find is over the long term, you're going to see that, 1 in 3 drugs that makes it into a phase 1 becomes a drug, and ultimately will bring the cost of monogenic diseases down. So if you just have one broken gene and we just have to figure out whether our platform can deliver that gene to the right cells in a targeted, safe manner at expression levels that are sufficient, right? That'll be what the platform does. And what you'll do is just know what that gene is, right? And it's going to turn out that you can do the proof of principle in a mouse for $250,000. You can write the IND for $2 million. And then if the IND gets accepted by the FDA, you can get your successful phase 1 for $10 million. And now you've got an asset, right? You have something like what we have. We have patents and data for an HIV cure. This is how everything is changing out there. And, I think that, this is something that will continue, to develop along and just keep putting more and more features into that platform to make it cheaper and more reliable for people to develop drugs and to get rid of all the barriers of entry. So you don't have to be a major drug company to bring out a drug anymore. So nobody's crazy anymore, right? Something enough about a disease, it is possible to cure. And the first stop is you see whether the AGT platform can get you 90% of the way there by giving you the foundation.
Jeff, one of the things, it's obvious. I'm sorry, Scott. One of the things that's obvious is as we're going through this is the passion that you have about this. And a lot of that revolves around having big aspirations, right? And using the word cure attached to a disease, and you emphasized that before, is something that's pretty rarely, if ever, done, right? It's a pretty bold thing to say. And it's impressive. So one of the things that we try to do in the Biotech Project is try to pass along tips or pearls to people about how to develop their own career. So obviously you've kind of harnessed that ability to think about things in an aspirational way, to be able to drive the passion, to be able to keep yourself going every day, but probably to keep everybody who works for you going every day, to be able to do that. So if you had to give our listeners some advice about how to harness that passion, how to put into effect that excitement to keep people charged up, how do you do it? What motivates you to get out of bed and do it every day and keep the aspiration when everybody's telling you it's science fiction?
Well, I think that was the past, remember. At this point, I got 15 years of actually posting milestones along that path that I said was going to happen. And even the whole industry has developed the way that I said it would. I said that eventually there'll be like a dot gene boom where, VCs will just be minting companies that are developing some drug on, and they'll have very little data, but they'll have huge values on Wall Street because it'll be the it technology. And I think that for a while that happened. It's kind of gone down a little bit right now. But, the difference between this and the .com boom is that if any of those companies actually finish their drug, even very small audiences will backfill the valuation of that drug, right? Because people don't realize that on these monogenic diseases, the cost of palliative treatments for the 7,000 diseases that are just single gene mutations out there is $2 to $4 trillion per year.
Wow.
That's a lot of companies in there. You can actually, even if there's only 200 people that are going to go blind because of this thing, if you fix it and you charge them all $1 million and it costs you $10 or $20 million to make, right? And then you've got, $200 million market.
Sure.
Okay, you're not going to compete with Roche, but it's worth doing. And you could actually just go ahead and just keep doing those, one after another, after another, after another. You could build a very big company that way, right?
Sure.
And it gets easier every time you do it.
Sure.
So the industry has totally changed now. And I think that, all of the people that are listening to this podcast, if they go out and they look into gene and cell therapy companies, they're going to find a lot of them that have a good line of sight to a solution that has high value. And I think a lot of those companies are going to make it. It may take a long time, and some of them may fail because they run out of money. But the reality is that it's software. You can always debug it. If it doesn't work the first time, you just change it a little bit and you try it again.
Yeah.
And, if you don't believe me, just look at Bluebird, right? They've been going for like a dozen years. They spent, billions of dollars, and they finally just got 2 drugs approved. I think they did it in an expensive, sort of inefficient way versus my model for developing drugs. But at the same time, it shows you that if you can keep the money flowing, you can get there, and those diseases will more than backfill their valuation. So their stock should be going up and up and up, right? So this is the nature of this new industry, and there are lots of players out there that are doing it. Of course, we're hiring, So now what do I do to get out of bed in the morning? I realize that what I do makes a difference, right? This is why I'm passionate. I'm like, it's like the day that I met Roscoe Brady, and I realized, like, oh my gosh, if this can be done, it must be done. Now, not only do I know that it must be done, I know it can be done, and it's just a matter of time. And eventually it will be done, but then we still have 10,000 human diseases to cure. So this industry will, the growth of this industry will outlive me probably. Although I'll tell you, with regenerative medicine and gene and cell therapy, people may live a lot longer. Mm-hmm. And so maybe I'll have more time on this than I realized. But, that's what gets me out of bed. And I think everybody in my company feels the same way. They realize that you can just do something that you're passionate about, that's fulfilling to you, helping other people. You can make a living at that. Right?
Right.
And, the possibilities, are just really apparent. I don't think anybody has any doubts anymore. I mean, across the entire industry, the power of gene and cell therapy and regenerative medicine, I think everybody understands is the future of pharmaceuticals. Even the pharmaceutical companies believe that. They have a different model for monetizing and commercializing it, but the basic idea is generally accepted now. And here we are, right on the cutting edge. It's easy to be excited. And then, what do? I just, I try to empower people to, to take their raw intelligence. You got to be smart to be successful. You've got to have self-discipline. In other words, you got to have a decent work ethic. And then if you add passion to that, that's the secret sauce. That's when a person who will do well can actually do great. And if you bring enough people like that into one company, all these people with potential for greatness, you now have a company with potential for greatness. And then it's like the Margaret Mead quote, right? Never doubt the ability of a small team to change the world. It's seldom anyone else that does, right? Because you just need a critical mass of those folks to start a revolution. And I think that, that's part of the excitement around here. And I think it's to varying degrees all throughout the industry. There's really no bad place to be in gene and cell therapy now. An industry where even Goldman Sachs says this is a $5 trillion brand new industry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's
you're on your way, which sounds good. Yep, that sounds really good.
I'm glad you're convinced of that. I mean, this is my normal pattern, and I'm very happy to hear that it's sort of hitting on with you. It's hitting on target.
No, there is. It is, and I have to ask you 2 business questions on the business model because I'm just so impressed and interested in what you're building there for so many different reasons. So your clinical trial program, you made mention how, you treat once and then you wait to see what happens, which is very different than traditional pharma, right? Where you treat until there's failure and then you see how many patients you need to treat till failure and whatnot, especially in oncology and some of these other, places that you've talked about. So financially, was that part of the planning to have a business model where you could have a clinical development program that, took one of the biggest obstacles to developing some of these, therapies? Because for those listening that aren't familiar with the type of trial you talked about, you mentioned you treat the patient and then you stop treatment and you wait to see what happens, you interrupt treatment. So it's very different than what most people in our industry and a lot of people listening will be used to hearing about.
Well, it goes back to the idea that John was saying about talking about cures. I mean, cures in the pharmaceutical industry, that was a 4-letter word, cure, right? You never said that because you never wanted to overpromise. But, the power of gene and cell therapy and the fact that it changes you permanently, it sort of tends towards the idea of a one and done cure. Right now, not all gene and cell therapies are that way. So, there are things that do wear off over time and whatever. But in general, when we make a change to a person using gene or cell therapy, it's so long term that you can't test it like an ordinary drug. That like an ordinary chemotherapeutic molecule, they'll test it in higher primates to find out, what is likely the highest tolerable dose for a human. And then they'll do a dose escalation study as their phase 1 on healthy people, right? And you can do that because, the stuff wears off. So even if somebody ends up in the ICU, there's a very good chance that they will recover because the liver will filter it out. If you don't destroy the liver, you're probably going to recover, and then you'll have learned, okay, that's too toxic a dose, and you use your phase 1 to determine here's the dose that we'll do it on in the phase 2 to see whether we get efficacy. And this is the first time you actually treat people that have the disease. Gene and cell therapy is completely different than that, and in that, like I was saying earlier, the FDA makes you prove theoretically that this thing will not cause pain and death. They also withhold you from using it in anything that isn't an acute need, right? Like if you're going to go out there and treat liver cancer, well, the FDA recognizes that, 85% of the people with advanced stage liver cancer will be dead within a year and 95% in 2 years. And so it's a low risk group that you would actually cause a loss to that population. So if you can go ahead and show something that's unlikely to make the situation worse and unlikely to cause pain, and theoretically meets all the criteria, you might get a chance to try that. Now, luckily, they thought HIV was important enough that we could try it, right? But if nobody's going to make a new headache drug using gene and cell therapy that permanently cures headaches, right? Because there's plenty of good solutions for that, and too many people have headaches. And so therefore, the path to making sure it's safe enough is just too long for gene and cell therapy. But I do believe that a lot of the causes of headaches will be eliminated by gene and cell therapy in 30 years from now, because we'll know exactly what causes it, and we'll just optimize your body where you never get that problem again. You never get high blood pressure. You never get, heart disease. You never get headaches. You never get, any of the Alzheimer's. You never get any of those things, right? Because this is the power of gene and cell therapy. But what we'll do is the FDA is going to say, where's the juice worth the squeeze, right? It's where the pain and the suffering and the death is the highest, and the risk is the lowest. And so that's going to be the first drip of these new solutions that will come out that way. And I hope that sort of, goes to your question about absolutely. Sort of the difference in developing this. Like I said, for $10 million, you could develop a drug. There isn't a disease on earth that isn't worth curing for $10 million. Okay, the smallest one we've ever worked on was familial dysautonomia, had 400 people on earth that have it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't matter. 400 is enough. They're going to go blind and deaf in a wheelchair one day. Right? That's the possibility. If you have that disease, you can, live in a wheelchair probably up until 30, and then things fade, right? And this is, is it worth $1 million to cure you? You bet it is. What's your life worth? The U.S. government would set your life at being $100,000 per year in value to society. So if we can give you 10 productive years, that's $1 million. If we give you 20 for $1 million, we didn't charge you money, we made you money, right? Now buying a drug is more like buying a computer. Why do you not hate Apple even though their iPhone is $1,000? Because it's worth $2,000. So you don't care that they're making a boatload of money because you're making a boatload of money on the other side, right? You're investing in your future. Drugs can be the same way.
So,
sure, Scott, I'm sure we're going to get all our Android, Apple comments coming in just any moment now, right? All the people who want that, yeah.
That's perfectly fine. Let them try and argue the points, right? So I've got to ask you, a lot of excitement here. We're already 40 minutes in, which I had no clue that's how far into this we are already. I just looked at the timer, and to be respectful of your time, but I have to ask you, so there's a lot of excitement there. There are people like me out there that are listening, that want to know what the next opportunities are. So if you could, in just a few minutes or whatever time you've got left, Jeff, what are the opportunities that there are going to be for folks that, might want to join American Gene Technologies, in the short term and the long term? I don't know if you can preview yet, but commercialization,
Sure.
We have a lot of people that are interested in commercialization that listen. Maybe we can find you some great candidates for down the road today.
I love it. Yeah. Well, go to our website, and even if there's not a job there, apply, because, what we're always looking for are smart, hardworking, passionate people. Okay. And then we just try to find them something in here because we're growing so much. And what do we need? Everything, right? Remember, it's very easy to think that a company is science, right? And you can't have a company without a product, but then you can't have a product can't be successful without the rest of the company. So we hire in everything. And the amazing thing about gene and cell therapy is that we're doing stuff that's never been done before. So it's not like we can hire experienced people. As a matter of fact, like I was saying earlier in the show, sometimes experience holds you back because you're kind of like you're so entrenched in the existing model that you don't realize that you can break free from that and create a new way of doing things and a more efficient way of doing things. And you can break down a barrier that you assumed was impenetrable, right? So sometimes it's better to have somebody, who just is passionate and ready to kick in doors than it is to, have somebody that happens to have been, really experienced at commercialization of Keytruda, right? So what I would say is that, yes, of course, if you are somebody that can think outside of the box, doesn't matter where you come from, and that experience isn't going to hurt you, right? Just as long as it doesn't hold you back. And, even if you don't have any of that, I just say, if you're in love with the mission, and if you've heard enough of the vision where you're like, yeah, I believe that's where the world is going, and I believe that's a good place to go, and I want to be part of that, either go to the AGT website and, just send us in an unsolicited, resume and why you want to work here, or go to any of the gene and cell therapy companies. There are so many out there. They're all, I just feel like most of them will eventually succeed on their mission. And even if they don't, all right, this is like, working at Apple was for me back in those days. Even if Apple were to have been beat by IBM, the experience of being at a cutting edge company like that encouraged and enabled so many young people to grow up in that industry. And it was like getting paid to get your PhD, and paid well, and being someplace fun at the same time, and having that passion and excitement. So, join a gene and cell therapy company, and then at the end of that, you are the product, right? Because yes, they may get a product out and you may get rich off the stock, or you may just be somebody that is that much more potent, that much more valuable as a participant in this industry. And right now the doors are wide open because the growth is far outstripping the number of people that are trained in this area. So this is the chance to be at a company like Apple. I mean, AGT just reminds me so much of the early days at Apple when I was there.
So well said. And I don't know anybody that could be listening right now, not exciting. In fact, I'm going to be keeping a close eye myself and on what things are going, because it just seems tremendously exciting, and I want to hear and follow along. I subscribe to the newsletter. For those of you who get a chance, go to the company's website. They actually have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. They have great social media presence, so great job on your social media folks that are handling that.
Thank you.
John, anything?
No, Scott, I mean,
so much.
Jeff, this has been really, really terrific. And I think Scott said it as well. I mean, the passion that you portray is amazing. So I'm sure your team can't be anything but excited and motivated, and for all the right reasons, because you guys are on it. So I commend you guys for all that. For our listeners, if you want to hear more and want to really dig deeper, the website is americangene.com. Feel free to go peruse that, check out what Jeff is doing, and let's all follow along the journey, because it sounds like you guys are going to be really successful, and we look forward to cheering you on from, at least at minimum, from the sidelines. So thanks for spending the hour with us, Jeff. We wish you all the best, and thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And could you? I've not asked this yet of another guest, but I'm going to ask it of you. Would you mind coming back as you get through these next kind of phases and keeping us informed and sharing what's coming next? Because I just can't wait to hear more about it.
For sure. I'd love to. Anytime.
I appreciate it.
All right.
All right, everybody. Thanks again for listening today. Hopefully you enjoyed this one as much as I think John and I had. And Jeff, I hope you enjoyed being on the show with us today. I did. I feel like there's so much more we could have picked your brain on, but we'll leave it at this for now and keep everybody hoping for more. For everybody that's listening, don't forget to subscribe and like, and please share your comments, email us back, and take a look at Jeff's information on the website, and make sure you're following, AGT, because I have a feeling there's going to be a lot to come out of that one. I love hearing the comparison to feeling like Apple. That's pretty exciting. If we can take medicine in the direction that Apple's taken and infrastructure, it's going to be, pretty impressive. So thanks everybody for joining us. On behalf of myself and John, have a great rest of your day, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Biotech Project. Scott and John have 50 years of combined expertise, with roles that have covered everything from frontline sales to senior vice president of medical affairs. Scott and John are industry veterans, equipping you with knowledge from guests in every role from CEO to sales, recruiters to hiring managers. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten some useful and practical information. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, check out the website at www.thebiotechproject.com. And for questions and comments, send an email to hosts@thebiotechproject.com. See you next time.